Welcome to your deep dive. We're digging into a research paper today about how design can be used to help whole industries evolve. It's like hitting a reset button on some huge EE problems.
It really is fascinating how design thinking is being applied more and more to these really complex problems, these systemic issues.
Yeah, like those massive, tangled issues that just feel impossible to even know where to start with, like climate change or poverty or access to healthcare. And that's what I find so interesting about this research. It uses the energy sector's shift to renewables as this case study. We hear all the time about needing to transition away from fossil fuels, but this research really digs into the HOW.
Right. And a lot of people are saying we need to move beyond just designing better solar panels and wind turbines. It's got to be about redesigning the entire system, how energy is generated and distributed, even how we think about consuming it.
So it's like we often focus on making the pieces of the puzzle more efficient, but this is saying, no, no, no. We need to redesign how the pieces fit together in the first place.
Exactly. The researchers call this sectoral transition design. And their big finding is that there's this huge gap between recognizing the need for change, which everyone seems to be doing these days, and knowing how to actually redesign an entire sector of the economy.
It does seem like everyone's talking about the need for large-scale change, but no one knows quite what to do about it.
It was really tricky. They interviewed 28 experts in the energy sector, both business leaders and policymakers, and they found that, yeah, everyone agrees change is necessary, but there's no roadmap. There's no, how to actually get this done guide.
Okay, so we've identified this, what do they call it, the sectoral design gap. So what's tripping everyone up? What are the biggest challenges they uncovered?
Well, they found three main areas where this gap is most apparent. First, there's a lack of what they call sectoral focus. Companies are so busy designing their own little piece of the puzzle, a new wind turbine here, a smart thermostat there, but they aren't really collaborating effectively to drive a system-wide shift to renewables.
So it's like every company is designing a part of a car, but no one knows what the final car is even supposed to look like.
Who's driving?
Or who's driving, exactly. A recipe for a very confusing car. So, challenge number one, not enough big picture collaboration. What's the second area where things broke down?
The second challenge, and I think this is a big one, is understanding what customers actually want, or rather a misunderstanding of it. They found that companies are so busy catering to early adopters, those who are already sold on renewable energy, that they're missing a huge swath of potential customers.
It makes sense, though. I can see how that laser focus on the most enthusiastic customers would create blind spots.
Exactly, and those early adopters are important for sure, but they only represent a small slice of the population. The research really emphasizes the need to design for the average person, considering their needs, their desires, and their constraints. What does an energy solution look like for someone who might be interested in renewable energy, but they're worried about the cost or the convenience or even just the reliability of it?
Okay, so challenge number two is designing for the majority, not just the early adopters. Got it. So what's the third challenge this sectoral design gap reveals?
The third challenge, and this one might be the trickiest to tackle, is all about the role of government. Businesses need these clear, consistent, long-term signals from policymakers to feel confident making these massive investments in renewable energy infrastructure.
Because these are not cheap changes to make.
Exactly. And right now, energy policies can be kind of all over the place, inconsistent and confusing,
Yeah.
which understandably makes companies hesitant to go all in on these big changes.
Yeah, it's like trying to build a house on shifting sand. Without that solid foundation of policy and regulation, it's just too risky to fully commit to a new way of operating. So we've laid out the problems. It sounds like we need a pretty radical shift in thinking to bridge this sectoral design gap. What solutions does this research offer?
That's where this sectoral transition design framework comes in. It's about applying design thinking not just to products or services, but to the systems and interactions that make up an entire sector of the economy.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. We're not just designing a better solar panel, we're designing a better context for that solar panel to exist within. Tell me more about how this framework actually works in practice.
It all starts with getting really clear on the ultimate goals. What are we actually trying to achieve with this sectoral transition, what they call societal requirements?
So in the case of the energy sector, it's about mitigating climate change by transitioning to 100% renewable energy. That's our North Star, right? Then what? What's the next step in making that vision a reality?
That leads us to step two, which is designing the right governance models. This is where government plays a crucial role. They need to create policies and regulations that incentivize businesses to move in the right direction. Think of it like setting the rules of the game in a way that makes renewable energy the obvious winner.
It's about creating a playing field where sustainability isn't just a nice to have, it's the default setting. I'm starting to see how this is a true design challenge, and a really complex one at that.
Absolutely. And that complexity is why the researchers stress the need for a very specific design process. This isn't something you can just slap together overnight. It requires careful thought and planning and collaboration.
So we've set our societal goals, we've got the government setting the stage with supportive policies. Where do businesses fit into all of this? What do they actually do within this framework?
This is where it gets really exciting. Step 3 is all about business model innovation. Once the government has created that supportive policy landscape we were talking about, businesses can unleash their creativity and design completely new ways of operating that are both profitable and sustainable within these new rules of the game.
So it's not just about tweaking existing business models around the edges, it's about fundamentally rethinking how value is created and delivered within this new paradigm. Did the researchers give any concrete examples of what this might look like in the real world?
They do. And one example that really struck me is this concept of product service systems. It's like a whole different way of thinking about ownership and consumption. So instead of buying a product outright, you're essentially buying the outcome or service that product provides.
Okay, give me an example. I'm not sure I'm following. How would this work with, say, something like washing machines?
Okay, so imagine instead of buying a washing machine, you're actually buying clean laundry as a service.
Hmm.
A company would install a high-efficiency washing machine in your home they own and maintain the appliance, and you pay a monthly fee for a certain amount of laundry service.
Oh, that's interesting. It's almost like going back to a simpler time, but with a high-tech twist. I remember my grandmother talking about sending out laundry back in the day. But how does this tie back to the energy sector and this idea of sectoral transition design?
It's a great question, because this type of model incentivizes companies to design products for durability and energy efficiency. If they own the appliance, it's in their best interest to make it last as long as possible and use as little energy as possible. Suddenly, sustainability is built into the business model itself.
Oh, I see. It's like flipping the script, making it profitable for companies to be sustainable rather than just an added expense. That feels like a game changer. But shifting gears for a moment, the research also touches on the role of design thinking in all of this. How do those two things intersect?
That's key to all of this. It's essential to understand that sectoral transition design isn't just about policy and economics, it's about people. And that's where design thinking comes in. Remember that second challenge we talked about? The need to design for the average person, not just early adopters?
Absolutely. Designing solutions that are both desirable and accessible to the majority.
Right. And that requires a deep understanding of people's needs and values and aspirations. It's not enough to create a technically brilliant energy solution. It also needs to be something people actually want to use, something that fits seamlessly into their lives.
So it's about designing solutions that are both technically sound and human-centered. I'm starting to see how this goes way beyond just designing physical products. It's about designing systems and experiences that work for everyone.
Exactly. And one design thinking method that's particularly relevant here is user research. This is where designers spend time observing, interviewing, and really understanding the people they're designing for. What are their pain points? What are their motivations? What are their barriers to adopting new technologies or behaviors?
It's about empathy, right? You're really stepping into the shoes of the people who will be using these systems and making sure their voices are heard.
Precisely. And that user research then informs the design process, ensuring that the solutions being developed are actually addressing the real needs of real people.
Oh.
It's about bridging that gap between expert knowledge and lived experience.
This is all so fascinating, but I have to admit, part of me is still wondering, this all sounds great in theory, but how do we actually make it happen? How do we move from these high-level ideas to tangible change in the real world?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the researchers emphasize that there's no one-size-fits-all answer. But they do offer some key insights. One is that this type of large-scale change requires collaboration on an unprecedented level. We need businesses, policymakers, designers, researchers, and citizens all working together towards a shared vision.
It's about breaking down those silos and fostering a true spirit of co-creation. We can't just keep operating within our own little bubbles. We need to start building bridges and speaking a common language.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key insight, which is the need for what they call systemic design. This goes hand in hand with that idea of collaboration because it's about understanding how everything is interconnected. We can't just focus on changing one part of the system in isolation. We need to consider the ripple effects and unintended consequences across the entire ecosystem.
Right. It's like that old saying, you can't change one thing without changing everything. This feels like a very different way of thinking about design. It's less about aesthetics and more about systems thinking, more about social impact. And honestly, it feels a bit daunting.
It is daunting, but it's also incredibly exciting
Hmm.
because it suggests that design can be this powerful tool for positive change, not just in the products we use, but in the very fabric of our society.
And that brings us back to this idea of sectoral transition design, that this framework for applying design thinking to these massive systemic challenges. What's your takeaway? What are your final thoughts on this approach?
It is ambitious, no doubt, but it feels incredibly necessary. Like we've been trying to rearrange the furniture when what we really need to do is redesign the whole house.
Totally. You're making me think about those tiny homes people are building now. It's not just about making things smaller, it's about rethinking how we use the space we have.
Yes. And I think what's exciting is that we're not starting from scratch here, right? We already have a lot of the tools and technologies we need to start tackling these wicked problems.
Okay.
What's often missing is that design thinking, that ability to connect the dots, see the system as a whole, and design for emergence.
So it's not just about designing better things, it's about designing a better context for those things to exist within.
Yes, and that context needs to be functional and desirable for everyone.
Right, equitable. Okay, so if we agree that this is the way forward, this more holistic, systemic approach, what role can we as individuals play in all of this? How do we move beyond just understanding these concepts and actually start contributing to this kind of systemic change?
Oh, that's such an important question. And honestly, I think it starts with recognizing that even small actions can have a ripple effect. We can support businesses that are embracing sustainable practices, right? We can make conscious choices about the products and services that we're using. And we can use our voices to advocate for policies that support a more sustainable future.
So it's about aligning our actions with our values, both in our personal lives and in like the public sphere.
Absolutely. And honestly, don't underestimate the power of just starting conversations. Talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues about these ideas. The more we can raise awareness and build a shared understanding of the challenges and the opportunities, the more likely we are to create lasting change.
It's about changing the conversation, shifting from a sense of overwhelm and helplessness to a sense of agency and possibility.
Exactly. Because this isn't just about solving problems, it's about creating a better future. And that's something we all have a stake in.
It really is. This has been an incredible deep dive. It's definitely challenged my assumptions about design and its potential to shape a better world. If our listeners want to learn more about sectoral transition design and how to get involved in this growing movement, where can they go?
Well, these researchers have actually created a website and online community where they're sharing resources and case studies and even just opportunities to connect with other people who are passionate about this approach. We'll be sure to include a link in the show notes.
Perfect. And to our listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What resonated with you? What questions are you still grappling with? Join the conversation online and let's keep exploring these ideas together.
Because the future is designed, not predetermined, and we all have a role to play in shaping it.
That's a wrap on this deep dive into sectoral transition design. Until next time, keep asking those big questions and keep diving deep.